Ever feel like you're just on autopilot, kind of following a script that you didn't even write? Well, it turns out there is a script. It's like an invisible blueprint that's shaping almost every part of your life. And in this explainer, we're not just going to look at that blueprint, we're going to learn how to actually rewrite it.
I mean, think about it for a second. You get a whiff of cinnamon, or maybe freshly cut grass, and bam, suddenly you're not here anymore. You're somewhere else entirely, feeling an emotion you haven't felt in years. How on earth does that happen?
Or what about this? You pull out your phone, you swipe down on an app, even when you know deep down there's probably nothing new. But you do it again and again. It's this tiny, automatic little motion, right? But man, it has a powerful grip on us. Why?
Well, believe it or not, that nostalgic smell and that crazy addictive swipe are driven by the exact same set of hidden rules. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and make those rules visible. Okay, first up, let's talk about the most fundamental kind of learning there is. The kind that just happens to us without any conscious effort at all. It's all about these automatic associations our brains are constantly making. Let me tell you a story. Meet Maya. Every single Sunday, her grandmother made pancakes. Now, years later, Maya walks into a random cafe. She catches that same smell of vanilla and butter, and her stomach instantly rumbles. She hasn't even looked at the menu, but her body's already reacting. But here's what's really fascinating about this. Her brain didn't just connect the smell to pancakes. No, it connected it to everything that came with them. That feeling of love, of safety, the pure comfort of her grandmother's house. It's like the smell became a shortcut to a really powerful emotion. And this is a perfect example of the science behind it all. It's called classical conditioning. You've probably heard of Pavlov's dog associating a bell with food. Well, it's the same thing. Maya's brain associated a neutral smell with something deeply meaningful, love and comfort. You do that over, and eventually that neutral signal triggers the response all by itself. So that's how our brains make these automatic links. But what about when we actively choose to do something? Well, that brings us to the next level of learning, where it's all about our choices and what happens right after we make them. Just picture an elementary school classroom. The first time the fire alarm blares, it's total chaos, right? But the teacher helps them, praises how quickly they lined up, and maybe hands out some stickers. The next time, the kids are in a perfect line before she even says a word. They didn't learn from a boring safety manual, they learned from the outcome. This is positive reinforcement in a nutshell. They did a behavior, lining up correctly, and something good was added to the situation. The praise, the sticker. That positive outcome makes them way, way more likely to do it again. It's such a simple idea, but it's incredibly powerful. Okay, but this is where it gets a little more interesting. Reinforcement isn't just about getting good stuff. Sometimes the biggest motivator in the world is just relief, the simple act of making something unpleasant finally go away. And this slide right here clears up something that confuses a lot of people. On the left, with positive reinforcement, think of it like a plus sign. You add something good, like praise. But on the right, negative reinforcement, you're removing something bad, like an argument finally stopping. The key thing to notice is that in both cases, the outcome is good, so the behavior is reinforced. It's not about good versus bad, it's all about adding versus taking away. So let's bring this back to that addictive phone habit we talked about earlier. Meet Leela. She refreshes her feed. Sometimes she gets a tiny reward, a new like, maybe a comment. But let's be honest, most of the time she gets nothing. So why on earth does she keep doing it? The secret sauce is this incredibly powerful concept called a variable ratio schedule. It means the reward isn't consistent. It's totally random. It might pop up on the next swipe, or maybe the 10th, or maybe not at all. It's that uncertainty that keeps our brain coming back for more. It's the exact same psychological hook that powers slot machines. And yeah, it's been deliberately built into the apps on your phone. Okay, so now we understand the mechanics. But this isn't just about being controlled by all these forces. The real power comes when we learn to use them ourselves. So, how can we become the architect of our own habits? Let's take a look at Malik. He's got a simple rule for himself. After he fights his way through a really tough task at work, he goes to his favorite coffee shop and gets a latte. It's not just about the caffeine, it's the whole ritual he's built. He has intentionally connected productivity with pleasure. What he's done, whether he knows it or not, is build a perfect habit loop. You can see it right here on the slide. It starts with the cue, the task is finished. That triggers the routine. go to the coffee shop, which of course delivers the reward, that amazing latte. By designing this loop on purpose, he's conditioning himself to associate hard work with a really good feeling. But hey, the reward doesn't have to be a cup of coffee or anything you can buy for that matter. Take Jamal. He starts running to get healthy. But what keeps him going on those mornings when he just wants to stay in bed? It's his neighbor who always yells, "You're killing it," and gives him a high five. That one little moment of recognition becomes all the fuel he needs. This is the power of social reinforcement. A smile, a quick word of praise, just a simple acknowledgement from someone else, that can be just as potent as money or food, sometimes even more so. We're social animals, and we are hardwired to respond to the approval of our community. And we can take this even one step further. The reward doesn't even have to come from another person. Just imagine a simple chart on a gym wall, and every time you finish a workout, you get to put a check mark on it. There's no prize, no applause, but just watching that line of check marks grow feels incredibly rewarding all on its own. This is called secondary reinforcement. All these abstract symbols, like points in a game, a check mark on a list, that little streak counter on your language app, they all gain power because we associate them with success and progress. Visible progress becomes its own reward, and it's a tool that modern life uses everywhere to keep us motivated. So, we've seen the principles, from those automatic associations we make without thinking, all the way to these complex reward systems. And now we get to the final, and I think the most important part, using this blueprint to consciously rewrite our own code. And really, this is the key takeaway. Once you can see the pattern, the cue, the routine, the consequence, you're no longer just the subject in the experiment. You can become the scientist. You can start designing your own systems of reinforcement to shape the person you actually want to become. So, I'll leave you with this question. These forces have been shaping you since the day you were born. Now that you can see the blueprint, the choice is yours. Who's holding the clicker now?
You know that feeling when you just can't stop scrolling through your phone? Or maybe why that language app you use feels so weirdly satisfying? Well, the answer might actually come from a psychological theory that's over a century old. So let's dive in and uncover this invisible but totally modern legacy of something called behaviorism.
Right, so behaviorism isn't just some old dusty thing from a textbook, the classic experiments with bells and dogs. Its core ideas never really went away. They just adapted. They became the quiet, humming engine behind so much of our daily lives, from how therapy works to the technology we use every single day.
And that really is the million-dollar question we're digging into here. How on earth did a science that was all about simple stimulus and response make the huge leap from a lab right into the palm of your hand? It's a journey that's actually way more fascinating than you might think.
Okay, so here's the crucial part to grasp. The early behaviorists, they really weren't interested in what was happening inside your head. They kind of treated the mind like a locked box. You can't see inside, so you only study what goes in and what comes out. They focused only on what they could see and measure. This idea that our actions are shaped by the consequences we get from our environment. A really simple concept, but with unbelievably powerful applications.
So one of the first and, honestly, most impactful places behaviorism completely transformed was therapy, but its role has changed a lot. It's moved from this rigid model of control to something much more collaborative. Let's take a look. This chart shows such a fascinating evolution. Early applied behavior analysis, or ABA, got a lot of criticism for being, well, kind of mechanical. It was all about getting compliance. But today, especially in how it's used with people with autism, the focus has completely flipped. Now, it's all about empowerment, using positive reinforcement, and working together to build skills for communication and independence. You could almost say the science grew a heart. Behaviorism also teamed up with the study of the mind to create one of the most effective therapies we have today, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. This triangle illustrates the whole idea perfectly. CBT shows us that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all locked in this reinforcing loop. So by changing a behavior, let's say you practice exposing yourself to something you're afraid of, you can actually break the cycle and change the thoughts and feelings that are tied to it. That is pure behaviorism at work, just woven into a much richer understanding of the mind.
All right, now let's shift to the place where we see this stuff pretty much constantly, our digital Skinner box. Because really, if you want to see behaviorism in action today, you don't have to look any further than the phone you might be holding right now. I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it?
The psychologist B.F. Skinner famously trained pigeons by giving them food pellets, but on unpredictable schedules. This idea, called variable reinforcement, works because, honestly, our ancient brain wiring hasn't really changed. So the exact same principle that kept pigeons pecking at a button is what keeps us glued to our devices. Our food pellets just look a little different. They're glowing notifications.
So what are the secret ingredients for this digital conditioning? Well, pretty much every app uses some combination of these. You've got unpredictable rewards, like a surprise notification or a match on a dating app that gives you a little hit of dopamine. Then there's the immediate feedback of a swipe or a like that just strengthens that behavior. It's a perfect little system, really, all designed to keep us tapping and scrolling away.
But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. These same exact principles are actually used for good in what we call gamification. Think about learning and fitness apps. They use streaks, badges, and really satisfying sounds to make positive habits stick. That little ding you hear when you get an answer right, that sound becomes what's called a conditioned reinforcer. It's a reward all by itself that makes you want to keep on going. And this brings us to a really critical ethical question. When our behavior is being shaped so effectively, we have to stop and ask, are these incredibly powerful tools being used to help us live better lives, or are they just being used to exploit our brain's wiring for someone else's profit?
That question really opens up these long-standing ethical debates that have followed behaviorism around since it first started. You see, the field didn't just grow on its own. It was pretty much forced to mature because of some very, very valid criticisms.
You can really see the whole evolution laid out here. The early critique was that behaviorism totally ignored our inner lives, that black box. The modern response is to use behavior as the key to understanding what's in the box. Early fears about manipulation have led to a modern focus on consent and self-management. And where the early methods were sometimes applied, well, insensitively, the field now really pushes for partnership and human dignity. Okay, and this is where it gets really, really empowering. After understanding how behaviorism is used on us by others, we can now flip the script and start using its principles for ourselves. And this, right here, brings us to the most exciting use of behaviorism today: self-direction. I mean, best-selling books like Atomic Habits have made this idea famous. It's all about becoming the architect of your own habits by consciously designing the environment that shapes you. And you can literally start your own experiment right now. It's a super simple 3-step process. First, create an obvious cue. That's the trigger for the behavior. Second, make the routine incredibly easy to start. And third, you have to follow it with an immediate reward to reinforce the whole loop. That's it. That's you taking control of your own conditioning.
And this isn't just some self-help fad, you know? Behaviorism's core logic is now deeply baked into cutting-edge science. Neuroscience has literally mapped the dopamine circuits that Skinner could only guess at. Reinforcement learning, which is the foundation of modern AI, teaches machines through trial and error, just like an animal in a puzzle box. Its ideas are truly everywhere.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Well, maybe it's that behaviorism, a theory that started by totally ignoring consciousness, has ended up giving us a powerful tool to actually enhance it. By understanding the forces that shape our actions, we get the awareness and the ability to design our own habits, our own focus, and our own lives. We get the power to write better answers for ourselves.
All right, let's jump right in. We're going to decode what's basically the secret language of a scientific revolution. I'm talking about the very words that give us a brand new way to figure out, why we do the things we do.
See, the thing is, behaviorists didn't just come up with new ideas. To make psychology a real science, they had to invent a whole new vocabulary, a really precise one. They basically forged a language to describe what we do in a way you could actually measure and test in a lab. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to explore these super powerful words, and you'll see every single one was picked for a reason: to be simple, physical, and this is the big one, something you can actually see. Okay, so where do we start? Let's begin by decoding the fundamental grammar of this whole new science. Think of them as the basic building blocks of action and reaction.
All right, first up, behavior. Now, get this straight. This isn't about what you're thinking or what you're feeling. Nope, it's all about what you're physically doing. So picture a teacher watching kids line up. The teacher has no idea if they're excited or bored to tears, right? But they can see their posture, how they're moving, how they're, conducting themselves. That observable action, that's behavior.
So what causes that behavior to happen in the first place? Well, that's a stimulus, and I love the origin of this word. It comes from the Latin for a stick used to poke cattle along. I mean, what a powerful image, right? It's that goad, that little, or big, push from the outside world. A perfect modern example? The buzz from your phone. It's a physical thing that just demands a reaction.
And how do we react to that push? With the response, of course. Think of it as the organism's observable answer to that call from the world. So the doorbell rings, that's your stimulus. The dog scrambling to the door, that's the response. It's a direct physical reply. Simple as that.
And this is where it all comes together in this core loop. You've got the stimulus and the response. The world calls out, and the organism answers. It's this simple two-step dance that is, and I mean this, the absolute foundation for everything else we're going to talk about in behaviorism.
All right, so we've got our basic vocabulary down. Now let's get a little more complex and see how these words combine to explain the very mechanics of how we learn.
And that brings us to a big one, conditioning. The word itself kind of implies a contract or an agreement, and that's exactly what it is. It's the process where we learn to link a specific stimulus to a specific response. You know, like if you always study at the same coffee shop, your brain makes a deal. That smell of coffee, that becomes the trigger, the stimulus for getting focused. But how do those connections get so strong? Well, that's where reinforcement comes in. The word is actually borrowed from architecture, and it literally means to make something stronger. And in behaviorism, reinforcement is any consequence that makes a behavior stronger, more likely to happen again. Think about a kid saying please and getting a huge warm smile from their grandma. That smile, that's pure reinforcement. It's like building the habit of politeness, brick by brick. Okay, so now let's talk about the tools that are used to actively change behavior, starting with the flip side of reinforcement. And that flip side is punishment. Now, this is super important to get right. In behaviorism, this has nothing to do with morality or getting revenge. It is purely mechanical. Punishment is simply any consequence that weakens a behavior, makes it less likely to happen again. So a student forgets their homework and loses recess time. The loss of that fun time is the punishment. It's just a simple functional definition. That's it. So there you have it, the basic dynamic. One builds behavior up, the other breaks it down. It's like a behavioral seesaw. But, and this is a really crucial insight from behaviorism, that seesaw isn't perfectly balanced. A lot of behaviorists, you've probably heard of B.F. Skinner, he's the most famous one, they argue that reinforcement is way more effective for shaping behavior in the long run. See, punishment might stop something for a little while, but it's reinforcement that actually builds the habit you want to see stick around. Okay, so what happens if the reinforcement just goes away? Well, that's called extinction. And I love the mental picture this word gives you. To snuff out a flame, it's perfect. Imagine your favorite vending machine just breaks. It stops giving you snacks. You're going to press the button a few more times, maybe give it a little shake, right? But eventually, you're going to give up. That learned behavior just fades away. The flame is snuffed out. But what about really complex stuff? I mean, you can't just sit around and wait for a complex behavior to happen by chance. And that's where this brilliant idea of shaping comes into play. The term is borrowed straight from the art of sculpting, and it's a perfect analogy. It's the art of reinforcing tiny little steps, chipping away and gradually refining an action until you get the final masterpiece you were looking for. Just look at how this works in practice. If you want to teach a kid to say the word ball, you don't just wait for them to say it perfectly. No way. You reward them for making the ba sound. Then you reward them for ba. And then finally for the whole word ball. Each little step is a small victory, and you're shaping that final behavior piece by tiny piece. Okay, so we've got all this theory. Let's bring it all back home. Let's see how this language, which is like 100 years old, actually describes the world you're living in right now. Have you ever noticed how one bad experience can kind of poison the well for a bunch of similar things? That's a classic case of generalization. So if a child gets a scary bite from one big dog, they might suddenly become afraid of all dogs, even the tiny, fluffy, friendly ones. That learned response, that fear, it just spreads out to a whole category of similar things. And the flip side of that coin is discrimination. This is our ability to learn the difference. You see this all the time with toddlers. A little kid might call every single man they see daddy at first, but, through experience, they learn to discriminate, to tell the difference and distinguish the one specific stimulus of their actual father from everyone else. And here's the real takeaway. This isn't just dusty academic stuff from an old textbook. I mean, think about it. The notifications on your phone, the reward systems in every video game you play, the algorithms that decide what you see on your social media feeds. They are all running on these exact principles: stimulus, response, reinforcement. This vocabulary is literally the operating system for how our modern habits get formed.
So that leaves us with one final thought. When you understand these words, you're not just learning psychology, you're learning the science behind your own habits. And once you know the code, well, that's when you get the power to start rewriting your own story.